Okay, welcome back. So, in Unit 2, if you remember, we made a simple landscape where we drew some colored rectangles and some ovals. And you guys probably added a bit more, like drew some buildings, maybe some cars. Yeah, I'm starting to really see some cool stuff with a lot of detail, which is excellent. So the next natural step is how do we make things move? So, for instance, how would I make this sun set? This sun would actually move down and maybe go beyond the horizon. Well, what you would have to do is draw your picture over and over and over again, kind of like a flip book, like a cartoon. And you just keep redrawing this sun, but with a lower y coordinate. So remember, we have to specify the top left corner. And what you could do is leave the x value fixed, but then the y value maybe goes up by 1 pixel over a certain amount of time. Anyway, there are a couple ways to do that. One way is by using a loop. And so this video, we're going to look at loops for the first time in programming. We're actually going to start with a couple simple examples. So we won't get to graphics quite yet, but I've made a class called while loops. So we're going to start with while loops today. But just as a little introduction, so far in the course, you've been exposed to selection statements. And selection statements basically just allow for your computer programs to make decisions or selections. So these are things like if-else statements or even else-if. Also case statements, which aren't covered in this course, but some of you may have come across these statements as well. So another major part of programming, along with selection statements, are repetition statements. So this is if you want your computer programs to repeat segments of code several times. So these are there's a few different loops. Today we're going to focus on while loops, but there's another loop called a do while, very popular loop called for loops. And then something that we likely won't do in this course are for each loops. Okay, so let's focus on while loops today. So we want to repeat a segment of code using a while loop. So one of the most classic examples is to write code that prints the numbers 1 to 100. Okay, so yes, of course, you could print 1, and then you could print 2, and then you could print 3. So this would work, but you would have obviously 100 lines of code, and that's not ideal. We want to try and minimize the amount of code that we have. So what we can do is we can make this thing a variable, like I. All right, and then we can make I begin at a certain number, in this case 1, and we can make it iterate or repeat. So I will go up by 1 each time, all the way up to 100, and then for every value of I, we're going to do this statement. Okay, so we can do that. I'm just going to push that down a bit. So we can make a variable I, and let's assign it to 1, because that's the very first value that we want I to be. And then we're going to say while I is less than or equal to 100. Okay, so the word while, same thing as long as. So it's kind of like saying as long as I is less than or equal to 100. But obviously that won't work. So we have to use the word while. And then we have the option of putting a curly bracket here. And that is, so just like if statements, you need curly brackets if you have more than one line of code. Just line that up there and get rid of that. Okay, and then also just like if statements, I'm going to tab that over. Okay, now I am going to add another line of code in here. I'm going to say I++. And if you don't remember what that means, it's the same thing as I is reassigned to I plus 1. So it basically takes the old value of I, adds 1 to it, and that will be the new value of I. Okay, in short, this small piece of code here just adds 1 to I. Okay, so let's just follow that. Before we run it, let's have a look. So I is 1, and then I'm asking, is I less than or equal to 100? Yes, it is. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to do this code. So it's going to print I, which is 1. And then I is going to be changed to 2. And then because this is a while loop, not an if statement, it's a while loop, which means once we get to this brace, we're going to come back up here and ask this again. Is this still true? Well, 2 is less than or equal to 100, so yes it is. So we're going to go in and we're going to print 2. And then I++, so I is going to be 3. And again, because this is a while loop, we're going to go back up to the top and test this statement out again. And this goes over and over and over and over again until I finally becomes 100. And then this is actually still going to be true because we put the equal sign here. So when I is 100, this is true. So we're going to print 100. And then I gets up to 101. And then finally this is false. So then when it's false, we just carry on after the loop with whatever code that you have down there. Okay, so this is called a while loop. It's very popular. It has 3 main components. Okay, so it has a loop counter. So first you have to create a loop counter, so that's before the loop. Then there is a Boolean condition. It's also called the loop condition. So this determines how long I'm going to run the loop. Okay, so as long as I is less than or equal to 100, I'm going to keep running the loop. And then we have an increment statement. It could also be a decrement statement. So it is, in some cases, you might have to make I go down by a certain amount. But in this loop here, I'm making I go up by 1. Okay, so there are 3 main components to a while loop. Okay, so let's run it and see if it worked. So let's see if it prints the numbers 1 to 100. And yes, it did. I'm going to have to scroll up to see my first number. And you may have to turn on unlimited buffering. So make sure that that is selected on and then run your program again, just so that it allows you to scroll all the way up to the top. Okay, so there's the top and it goes all the way down to 100. Okay, I can even change this. I could make this 10,000. So if I compile it and run it, okay, so that took a little bit longer. And to have some fun, you could change that to 100,000. Okay, and then you compile, and you can see it actually takes a little bit of time to get there, but eventually it does. And you could scroll all the way up to the beginning to see the 1. All right, so it works pretty fast. So let me just change that back to 100. Okay. Now, what if I wanted to print the numbers horizontally? So let's say I wanted to print the numbers 1 to 100 horizontally with a tab between them. Okay, so what I mean is something like, 1, and then you'd have a tab 2, and then a tab 3, and so on, all the way up to 100. Okay, so what would that look like? Well, I'll build a brand new loop here. So I can't use I again because I already used it up above. So I'm going to use, let's say, j. So j equals 1. And then while j is less than or equal to 100, put my braces, okay, line them up, and then tab. So this is the code I want to repeat. So instead of saying print line, I'm just going to say print I concatenated with a tab. And that will print each value of, j, not I. That will print each value of j starting at 1. And don't forget to increment j. So j is going to go up by 1. Okay, but it's just going to print j and then a tab, so it won't go to a new line. So it's just going to print the numbers horizontally. So if I compile and run that, okay, it's first going to print my 100 numbers vertically. So that first loop that I made, it's going to do that first. And then, let me just fix my output window here. Okay, there. So it's going to first print my loop. That's what I did first, 1 to 100. And then you can see after that, it prints the numbers 1 to 100 sideways. So this is my J loop here, okay, all the way to 100. All right, so it's up to you. If you want to print numbers vertically or horizontally, you can do that just by using either print or print line. Okay. All right, let's do one more example. Let's print let's just print the even numbers from 1,000 down to 0. Okay, so I want to print 1,000 and then 998, 996, all the way down to 0. So I want to print the even numbers only, starting at 1,000 and then counting down to 0. Okay, so I'm going to make a brand new loop down here. And I'm going to create my loop counter. This time I'm going to call it K. And I'm going to set it to 1,000 this time. So usually you set your loop counter to the very first number that you want printed. And then I'm going to say while K, okay, instead of less than, like in my other two examples, this time I'm going to use greater than because the loop's going backwards. So while K is greater or equal to 0. So as long as the K variable is greater or equal to 0, I want to do two things. I want to print line K. So I want to print the value of K and then go to a new line. And then I want to make K go down by 2. So instead of making it go down by 1, I want it to go down by 2. And to do that, we can say K minus equals 2. And that will change the value of K to 2 less. You could also do this. You could also say K is assigned K minus 2. That will also work. Okay, and then make sure the loop is closed. There it is there. All right, so this should work. Here's my loop counter. And here's my test condition, my loop condition. And then here is my decrement statement. So K is going down by 2. So let's see if that worked. So I'm going to compile, run it. Again, I've got three programs here. There's my first loop, the numbers 1 to 100. And then there's my second loop, the numbers 1 to 100 horizontally. And then here is my next one. Oh, I notice I'm starting at 998. And that's because my 1,000 is at the end of this line. Okay, so what I need to do is at the end of my second program, I'm just going to put a blank print line statement. And that will just advance this to a new line because I was using print over and over and over again. So the very last value of J was printed. So then I want to tell it to go to a new line to get ready for my last loop right here. Okay, let's look at that one more time. So I'm going to run this, and where is it? There it is. So there is my K loop, my third loop. So it starts at 1,000, and then it's going down by 2 all the way down to 0. Okay? All right, so we're going to stop there. There's many more things you can do with while loops. Of course, graphics, so you can make shapes kind of move across your frame. You can also allow the user to enter data inside a while loop, so they continue to enter data until a certain condition is met. But we're going to stop right here and just practice printing integers. All right, so thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.